In a world dominated by men and molded by tradition, one woman dared to rewrite the rules, not just of science, but of society. Her name was Marie Curie, and her journey from the dusty streets of Warsaw to the heights of international acclaim was anything but conventional. Born Maria Skłodowska on November 7, 1867, in Russian-controlled Poland, Marie entered a world constrained by imperial rule and strict gender roles. Her father was a teacher of mathematics and physics, her mother a headmistress. Both were committed to education, but they lived under the shadow of oppression. Polish culture was being systematically erased by Tsarist Russia, and opportunities for women, especially in science, were virtually non-existent. Yet from an early age, young Maria showed a voracious appetite for learning. She devoured books, mastered subjects far beyond her years, and developed a quiet resilience that would define her life. But even brilliance had its limits in a land where women were barred from attending universities. Refusing to be silenced, Maria joined the Flying University, a secret underground network that taught forbidden Polish culture and progressive science to young minds willing to risk everything. It was here that the foundations of her scientific discipline were laid, and it was also here that the fire within her began to burn brighter. In 1891, at the age of 24, Maria left everything she knew behind and traveled to Paris, enrolling at the Sorbonne under the name Marie. She spoke little French, lived in poverty, and studied by candlelight in freezing attic rooms. She often fainted from hunger, surviving on little more than bread, tea, and determination. But Marie excelled. She earned degrees in physics and mathematics, ranking first in her class. Her brilliance was unmistakable, but even in the intellectual salons of Paris, women were still viewed as outsiders in the scientific world. That changed when she met Pierre Curie, a physicist and researcher with a quiet demeanor and an open mind. Their intellectual chemistry soon gave way to real affection, and in 1895 they married. It was a true meeting of minds and hearts. Pierre supported Marie's work, not as a partner behind the scenes, but as an equal. Together, the Curies embarked on an extraordinary journey, one that would illuminate the very structure of matter. In 1896, Henry Becquerel accidentally discovered that uranium emitted mysterious rays that could pass through solid objects. Marie was intrigued. She began investigating this phenomenon with Pierre at her side, developing the theory that these emissions were coming from the atoms themselves, a radical idea at the time. Their home laboratory was primitive, and the work was grueling. Using tons of pitchblende, a mineral rich in uranium, Marie labored day and night, boiling it down, analyzing residues, and isolating compounds. The process was punishing physically and mentally. The materials they handled, radium and polonium, were invisible, unpredictable, and dangerously radioactive. Yet the danger was unknown, and they took no precautions. In 1898, Marie and Pierre discovered not one but two new elements, polonium, named after her homeland, and radium, which exhibited astonishing radioactivity. Marie coined the term radioactivity itself, opening a new frontier in physics and chemistry. The scientific community was stunned. Their findings challenged established beliefs about the structure of matter. At a time when the atom was thought to be indivisible, Marie's research suggested otherwise. She wasn't just expanding knowledge, she was rewriting the laws of science. In 1903, Marie Curie became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, sharing the Nobel Prize in physics with Pierre and Henry Becquerel. It was an unprecedented honor, but the committee originally intended to award only Pierre and Becquerel. Pierre insisted that Marie's work be recognized equally. Reluctantly, her name was added. Even in triumph, she faced skepticism and sexism. Critics dismissed her as a mere assistant to her husband. Others attacked her for defying gender roles, but Marie, calm and focused, continued her work. For her, science was a calling, not a competition. Then, tragedy struck. In 1906, Pierre Curie was killed in a street accident, run over by a horse-drawn carriage. Marie was devastated. He had been her husband, her partner, her collaborator. But even in mourning, she chose to honor his legacy by continuing their work. The University of Paris appointed her to Pierre's former professorship, making her the first female professor in the university's history. She continued researching radioactivity, refining measurements, and pushing boundaries. In 1911, she made history once again, winning the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for her work in isolating pure radium and defining its atomic weight. To this day, she remains the only person ever to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. But the accolades didn't protect her from scandal. The press turned on her during a brief relationship with a fellow scientist, painting her as a threat to French morality. Demonstrators gathered outside her home, hurling insults and rocks. She was told to skip her Nobel ceremony to avoid public outrage. Marie went anyway, because for her, the truth of her work and her right to be there mattered more than public opinion. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for approval. She simply kept moving forward. The world watched in awe and in discomfort as Marie Curie ascended to heights no woman had ever reached in the sciences. But what the world often failed to see was the cost. Behind every discovery, every accolade, and every headline was a woman working through pain, loss, and fatigue. Marie Curie didn't just battle scientific uncertainty. She battled a society that questioned her every move. Yet she never wavered. After her second Nobel Prize in 1911, Curie could have rested on her legacy. She could have retreated from the public eye and enjoyed the status she had earned. But instead, she returned to the laboratory. Her mission was far from complete. In the years leading up to World War I, Curie focused on the practical applications of radioactivity, particularly in medicine. She began experimenting with the use of radium in cancer treatment, laying the groundwork for what we now call radiation therapy. Her belief in science as a tool for healing and human betterment was unwavering. When World War I broke out in 1914, Curie once again defied convention. She equipped mobile X-ray units, later nicknamed Little Curies, and trained over 150 women to operate them on the front lines. These units were used to examine wounded soldiers and locate bullets and fractures, saving countless lives. She drove trucks, fixed machinery, and spent long hours in war hospitals, not as a symbol of fame, but as a servant of humanity. Yet she accepted no glory for it, no medals, no applause. She saw it as her duty, nothing more. After the war, she continued to advocate for scientific education, especially for women. She founded the Radium Institute in Paris, a leading research center in radioactivity and medicine. Under her leadership, it became a hub for groundbreaking research and treatment, eventually producing several Nobel laureates among its staff and students. But her lifelong exposure to radiation was taking its toll. At the time, the dangers of radioactivity were still poorly understood. Marie often handled radium with bare hands, carried test tubes in her coat pocket, and stored glowing samples in her desk drawer simply because she found them beautiful. She wrote of falling asleep with radium next to her bed, mesmerized by its ethereal light. The notebooks she kept from those years are still radioactive today, stored in lead-lined boxes and handled with protective gear. By the 1920s, Marie was frequently ill, suffering from anemia, fatigue, and joint pain. Her vision dimmed. Her bones ached. Yet she refused to stop working. She traveled extensively, raising funds for research and promoting the peaceful use of atomic energy. In the United States, she toured with her daughters, meeting President Harding and receiving a gram of radium, an immensely valuable gift funded by American women. She remained humble through it all. "I am among those who think that science has great beauty," she once said. A scientist in his laboratory is not only a technician, he is also a child placed before natural phenomena, which impress him like a fairy tale. Marie Curie was a woman of contradictions, both reserved and revolutionary, quiet yet unyielding. She disliked the limelight, yet stood at the center of history. She loved solitude, but also community. She was a scientist and a mother, a patriot, and a global citizen. Her daughters, Irene and Eve, inherited her strength in different ways. Irene became a scientist in her own right, winning a Nobel Prize in chemistry alongside her husband, Frédéric Joliot Curie, for their work on artificial radioactivity. Eve, the younger daughter, became a journalist and writer, later authoring a biography of her mother that became a global bestseller. In 1934, at the age of 66, Marie Curie passed away from aplastic anemia, a disease likely caused by her prolonged exposure to radiation. She died in a sanatorium in the French Alps, surrounded not by fanfare, but by peace. Her body was laid to rest next to Pierre's. But her story didn't end there. In 1995, Marie Curie became the first woman ever to be entombed in the Pantheon in Paris on her own merits, joining the ranks of France's greatest minds. Her remains, still radioactive, were moved in a lead coffin, a final symbol of the brilliance and danger that had defined her life. Today, Marie Curie stands as more than a scientific pioneer. She is a symbol of resilience, intellect, and the quiet power of persistence. Her legacy extends far beyond her discoveries. It lives in every radiation treatment that cures disease, every woman who enters a laboratory, and every mind that refuses to accept limits. She taught the world that science is not a realm reserved for the privileged few, but a universal language open to anyone bold enough to speak it. She proved that greatness does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers behind lab doors, burns long into the night over half-filled notebooks, or endures in the silent fight against illness, war, and inequality. Marie Curie did not ask to become a legend. She simply pursued truth with relentless devotion. And in doing so, she changed the world, not once, but twice. The light she discovered was not just physical. It was symbolic. A light for science, a light for women, a light for the future.